Welcome to the Evolution Partners podcast, where I talk with the world's leading thinkers, planners, and doers who are helping to build great companies in their own way. We learn how the work they're doing is creating an impact and get to know a little bit more about them and what makes them tick. This episode is brought to you by Evolution Partners, where we help leaders to confidently build enduring great companies using our proven, structured, strategic planning process that ensures you build and execute the right plan. Check us out at evolutionpartners.com.au. Also, you can check out our books, Made to Thrive, outlining how to be a great CEO, as well as Onboarded, which is about making your new hires more effective faster. John Moncrieff is a thinker, planner, and doer. He's an entrepreneur turned community leader and coach with over a decade of experience helping business owners build stronger, more purposeful companies. John first joined the Small Giants community in 2011 at its inception, leaning on it during challenging times in his own business. 2025, this year, he succeeded Paul Spiegelman as the head of the Small Giants community, carrying forward the philosophy from Bo Burlingham's book, Small Giants, helping companies who decide to be great instead of big. John, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks very much for having me on. It's fantastic to be here.
Well, it's my pleasure. I am very passionate about the topic and the community broadly, and the work that has, I guess, flowed on from Bo Burlingham. So before leading Small Giants, you turned to this community during a tough time in your own business. For those who may not know, what is the Small Giants community? And what was that experience like for you?
Yeah, so the Small Giants community, in terms of sort of description of what the community is a group of leaders who are driven by values, so values-driven leaders. The genesis of the community, you said, was back in 2010, 2011. Paul Spiegelman, who founded the community with Bo Burlingham, had read Bo's book, Small Giants, and was going through some challenges in his own business at the time. And the book helped him think about those and navigate those. And he thought, hey, it'd be great to bring together a community of, way Paul describes it, sort of like-hearted individuals rather than just like-minded. He did that, and we had our first conference in Constance in Germany in 2011, 2012, somewhere around there. So it's been 15 odd years. And for me, you referred to how the community had an impact on my life and in my business way back then. I was in a passport group with a bunch of the early sort of folks involved in Small Giants. And we used to have these groups that go from business to business and go behind the scenes. We'd pull back the curtain, take a look at what was going on in Zingerman's or Paul's Business, Barrel Health or Cliff Bar. And we'd then meet the day afterwards and kind of talk through some of the things that we'd learned. A lot of us would go away and rip and deploy. But unlike other groups at the time, other peer groups, we, I think, got vulnerable with each other a lot quicker. And the Small Giants kind of community has a way of doing that. And I was struggling with my business, and in my cohort at the time, or my roundtable at these passport events, I had Rob Dubé, who was very early on an EOS company and Image One, and I mentioned in Gino's book. And Rob kind of trying to help me in saying, John, you need to put EOS in here. And I had somebody else in the group talking about putting Great Game of Business in. And the connections that I made with those folks and the way I was able to lean on them at that time to help me navigate some of the challenges that I was going through in my business was just something that had this ripple effect afterwards. So I've kind of managed to sort out my business, but also kept telling everybody about, hey, there's this fantastic community. You need to go and take a look at Small Giants and join the community. And I think all of us in that group felt that we needed that at that time in our lives. We were probably 35 to 45 years old and trying to navigate this growth in the business and able to lean on each other. So that's the story behind how I ultimately ended up getting involved.
Wonderful. Now, how that resonates with me, what that makes me think about is the people who are appealed to the book are probably appealed to the sense of community and perhaps caring for people in the totality of their lives or the mojo. And so the people who are drawn to that, who are drawn to go a little bit further, I mean, clearly what I'm hearing is that that's the sense of community that you're intimating that you experienced. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. I mean, I think the key thing is people at the center of everything. So,
Yeah.
while Bo's book is businesses that sort of put being great over of being profitable or big, sorry, not profitable over being big, people at the center of what's going on there. So people are really key. The leaders of these businesses are deeply caring about the community around them, the people that work in those businesses. There's a very intimate relationship with those folks, and they care about the growth and the development of those people. So
Yeah.
that's such a key kind of philosophy of this community. And I got a text over the weekend, or a LinkedIn connection from a founder, and he sort of said, yeah, I've been looking for a community to get involved in, and we ended up getting into a little bit of exchange. And he said, this is the place where I can find my kind of crazies or whatever. Interesting description, but
Yeah.
we are a little bit different, but it's because we're putting values and people at the center of everything that we do, which is kind of a little bit unusual for many business owners even today still.
Nice. So you touched on something there that Bo Burlingham spoke about. So I had Bo, the author of the Small Giants book, I had him on the podcast in episode 8 and 9 on this podcast. And what he said is small giants companies choose to be great instead of big. And that's kind of what you said just before. So how do you bring that ethos to life across the community today? How do you sustain that?
I think I made a bit of a faux pas there. They choose to be great instead of big but profitable. So that's really important, of course. But in terms of that ethos.
And I'm going to pick you up there, John, because that's why people should read the second edition of Small Giants and not the first one, right? For almost exactly the same reason. Like the profitability is essential. It's critical. It's the lifeblood. Please continue.
Yeah, because you can't get this done unless you're profitable. So that's key. And I support you on that. Definitely read the second version. So going back to the question on ethos, first of all, a lot of the businesses that come to the Small Giants community and get involved in the community are attracted because of this idea that they want to build a great business. They don't just want to build something that is big. For me, it was tired of chasing revenues. Before I got involved, it was 5 million, 10 million, 15 million, 20 million, up to 200 people. It was this constant kind of chase, and chasing outputs, not thinking about the internal, the people dynamic and all that. And I think Tom Walter sums it up really well, where he says, Jean, when I let go of chasing all the outputs, the profit and the revenue and all those kind of things, it all took care of itself. When I started to focus on the culture, when I started to focus on the people, I could stop worrying about.
Yeah.
So first of all, a lot of the companies in Small Giants are attracted because of this idea of not wanting to go the same way as everybody else. And that's one of the characteristics that Bo pulls out in the book, is that the owners and the founders of these businesses, or one of the characteristic traits of a small giant, is that they want to do things differently. Zingerman's didn't want to go and franchise and go across the whole of the US. They decided to build a community of businesses in Ann Arbor. And they're at, I think, 80 odd million. Hasty Catering, Tom was at 70, 80 million. They'd all started at kind of 3 with struggles and battles. And for Tom, his employees walked in and said, Tom, unless you change from this command and control structure, we're out of here. Tom made the choice to change because he was desperate. He knew that if he didn't, he's in debt for buildings and all sorts of things that he had just bought. He needed these young emerging leaders. So he was sort of forced to make that change. And ultimately that led him to growing this successful business. But it was driven by Jim Collins' book, Good to Great, and a lot of culture change and all that sort of thing. So the Small Giants leaders are naturally kind of gravitate, or the owners and founders, to this, and are very intentional about how they grow their businesses. They're not sort of shiny object or opportunistic or just chasing revenue profit for the sake of it. They're very, very intentional in their growth. Matt Hoying talks about having a filter system where they put are we going to open a new branch? Run it through the filter. And that may take a while, but ultimately what will come out is sort of a yes or no. And that filter is their values, their purpose. And they kind of run that decision through the filter. How should we set up our employee ownership? Run it through the filter. So I hope that answers the question, but
Look, it does. I'm really prompted to say you spoke about Zingerman's and Cliff Bar, two companies that are, I guess, synonymous with the book. Are there any other companies outside of the book, name them or don't name them, perhaps from a passport event that embodies the philosophy that comes to mind?
Yeah, I mean, Paul Spiegelman's business, when we did it behind the scenes there, I think the head of HR was the head of fun and something like that. And you're walking into Beryl Health back in those days, you could feel the energy inside the business, the mojo. But if I remember rightly, a lot of Paul's employees, they were an old Walmart warehouse, were single moms. I think there was a high percentage of sort of single moms in that. And I remember Paul talking about running trick or treat events at the facility because they were a lot of folks lived in an unsafe neighborhood, or having events there. So caring about people right down to the level of the children. Beryl Health. As you mentioned, we mentioned Zingerman's, Cliff Bar. Obviously, Cliff Bar ultimately got sold, and there was that. Kid Erickson had his number. A lot of these businesses thought differently about Tasty Catering, as I said, is very different in that they took Jim Collins's book way back in must have been around 2010 or so, I guess, and really embraced it completely and said to the owners, hey, you guys sit on the side, we're going to work on culture, and you're not going to get involved unless you're asked to get involved, and just letting go and giving the employees the opportunity to do that.
That's awesome. Now, you've spoken about the vulnerability and the mojo of the community. Mojo obviously being one of the words that I first think of when I think about Small Giants is this the way that Bo described it. So how do you ensure that new cohorts or new leaders from companies who join the community embody or step into that same culture of connection and openness? Because it needs to be fostered, right?
Yeah, it does. We obviously have a new member onboarding sort of process, which is typically folks are going to sign up, and their first touch with us is the summit. So we run an annual summit where it's been in Detroit for the past 10 years or so. As you come into the Small Giants community, depending on how you come in, whether it's through a referral or reading Bo's book or just coming in through the website, we'll kind of bring you into the fold, set up a contact call, a connect call, have a conversation, tell you a bit about the community, do an onboarding session with a group of members. So you start to kind of get a feel for the community. The summit is a big one. So trying to get all those folks who've come in to come to our annual summit and just experience the community firsthand. We're not your normal business conference. I was talking to Rob Dubé yesterday, and we were talking about the CEO side of the conference. We aren't the kind of conference where you're going to get the same talks one after another that are kind of very business related, more how to deal with the challenges you're facing as an owner and a CEO. And some of the stuff goes pretty deep. So that's probably going to be the first touch point with somebody who's coming on in person. And then we run a number of online events all the time. So you can, if you as a business owner have a challenge, you can jump into one of our online events and kind of jump into the hot seat and have the whole team help you to try and overcome that. And all of those kind of things are free, but that's typically kind of the nurturing process. We are bringing back something called Passport. So we're going to be doing more of those behind the scenes visits. We've got our first one coming up in Dallas, where we're going to go and visit Textamol, phenomenal business, and Venturity, also brilliant business. And we will go behind the scenes with each of them. We'll have a discussion on the difference between employee ownership trusts and ESOPs and all sort of different ownership structures. We'll take a look at how Venturity runs their huddles. We'll take a look at how Textamol has taken Lencioni's work and kind of made it their own and turned the 5 dysfunctions of a team into something that they own, which is, for me, was really exciting to do with Sabrina and to take a look at with their team. So there are these regular get-togethers. And then lastly, we're looking at doing some pop-up dinners in different cities, which are either going to be hosted by ourselves or business owners in those cities. So we're kind of putting together a framework for how we just do these little pop-up dinners and help folks just get together and have a bit of community time.
What's the revenue range? And now I say that because people might think small giants and they might think, oh, this is for 500,000 or 1 million revenue type businesses. What's the range of revenues throughout the community?
Yeah, I think, take a stab at the average is probably around 5 odd million. And then Norm Brodsky, who was in the book City Storage, was 100 million. He sold City Storage for, I think it was 100 million at the end of the day, but very big document storage business. Cliff Bar, way back when, was kind of a little part of the community. Danny Mad, Cliff Bar recently sold for 2 billion. And then at the bottom end, we have folks who are sort of solopreneurs in some instances, or just kind of getting going. And we have businesses from all over the world: Australia, Germany, Romania. The US is obviously very big, South America. So I think, to your question, we're open to
Yeah,
anybody.
okay.
And that was always the idea, to keep it
In
as accessible as possible.
Thank you. In business, many founders can struggle with stepping back without losing the soul of their business. Now, we spoke before we started recording about ESOPs and a few things like that. It can be hard, right? Because they lose the soul, and the soul is like mojo. So what have you seen in the way that small giants leaders make that shift, and what mistakes can they find along the way?
I think what happens is you lose that sense, or you've got your purpose, but you lose your why.
Yeah.
And the business is often the why. You still have that sense of purpose as a business owner or somebody who's doing some good out in the world or whatever that is. But then when the business goes away, you lose that why. And that's a big challenge. And what I'm seeing in the community is that a lot of the business owners, Carl Erickson, for example, from Atomic Op, or Tom Walter from Tasty Catering, they're finding a sense of purpose in the community. I was with Carl Erickson for dinner recently. He owned Atomic Objects, one of the top software companies in the States. And he sort of retired not long ago, but he is very involved in the Small Giants community and coaching and mentoring community, sort of next generation leaders. He's also very involved in helping and supporting businesses in his local area. And I think being in this community, you're hearing a lot of stories about the challenges that business owners went through as they go through that exit process. Bo wrote the second book, Finish Big. So succession is something that's been spoken about constantly. We're talking about, Paul got up on stage 2 years ago and talked about going through 9 months of depression, and he couldn't come to an event, but there's this openness and transparency and vulnerability where owners are talking about the real, or the founders and CEOs and owners and leaders, talking about the real challenges they have in their lives and how they overcame them, or how they're dealing with them. And I think that's so critical for folks who are kind of looking at that succession process, or looking at going through an exit or whatever it is,
Yeah.
to be thinking about what's next. Because nowadays, this is where we spend our time, and there's a big chunk of our friends in the business. We talk about in Small Giants building purposeful business. We're also building friendships. And when you come out of that, you're losing half of your sort of friend network or more these days, unless you're still somehow involved. And I think this community gives that to a lot of CEOs and founders who want to carry on doing something after they exit or retire.
Yeah. Is there an example of a company that transitioned toward employee ownership, ESOPs and the like, that comes to mind? Because ESOPs are a very big part of, and employee share ownership is a very big part of the philosophy. I don't necessarily think everyone does it, but I know that it's very much in the values. Is there a company that comes to mind that adopted it, and what shifted it as a result?
I think of Eric Rieger from Webbit comes to mind straight away. So Webbit's an IT managed service provider, I guess would be the best description, based in Chicago area. And the shift for Eric is that his purpose is to basically kind of close down the divide between the haves and the have-nots, close the wealth gap, so to speak. And he sees ESOPs as a way of doing that. So he talks about being able to go out and sell the business. He gets calls from private equity regularly. He could go and sell the business and sail off into the sunset, or buy his Ferrari, or spend the days on the golf course. Instead, he's chosen to follow the employee ownership path, and ESOPs are one of the most popular routes. And I think they're at 30% ESOP at the moment. They're moving toward 100 by 2030. So you'd be 100% employee owned by 2030. But his whole purpose, I think even to a large extent, Weber's purpose is around this closing the wealth divide. And they want to be a beacon for other businesses to understand ESOPs, to understand this whole idea of closing the gap. So for their partners, for their customers, they want to be that beacon of the employee ownership beacon and teach them about that. And I really admire what Eric's doing there. Within the community, I would say that a large percentage of companies are employee owned in some way or other. So Carl Erickson, who I spoke about a moment ago, LC, but I think there's 90 owners in that LLC. So that's a different model. Matt Hoying, they've kind of got a hybrid of an ESOP. So they kind of figured something out that would work best for them. Brad Herman with Textimal went down the ESOP route, decided that it wasn't for him. And they rolled back and they went to an employee ownership trust.
Yeah.
Bingaman's is another employee ownership trust. There's only about 50 of those in the States at the moment. But I think it's more common in the UK and the sort of Commonwealth countries where this idea of a trust owning the business as opposed to the ESOP, which is more of a kind of 401 retirement kind of plan thing. So these alternative ownership models are really big in the community. And another one, which isn't really an ownership model, but the great game of business where employees, are getting something out. So I was having a conversation with Tom Walter the other day at Tasty Catering. And he said, we haven't gone the employee ownership model, but we've gone the employee ownership model through GGOB because a lot of the employees don't want to take on the accountability and the responsibility, but rather get a piece of the pie, so to speak. So I think that's there are going to be some owners who are thinking about the typical kind of private equity or strategic exit.
Yeah.
But the vast majority of the folks in the community are kind of thinking toward alternative models around employee ownership.
Couple of things. You just mentioned GGOB, so that's an acronym for The Great Game of Business, which is a book by Jack Stack. We had Rich Manders on, and we spoke about on the podcast, and we spoke about The Great Game of Business. So it's a philosophy of running businesses, what I would say, just to pick that up. But when we talk to people about employee ownership schemes and ESOPs and these type of things, two of the things that can come to mind for some people who are unfamiliar are, firstly, am I sacrificing the potential sale price? So if I sell, let's say 30% of the company, am I selling it to employees at a lower price and therefore sacrificing A, and then B, is it too complicated? Does it make it harder? Any response to?
I mean, first of all, I think anyway, however you're going through a succession process is going to be a hard process if you're not prepared, if you haven't been kind of getting ready almost from the early stages of your business. So I think it's going to be hard if you aren't prepared. And I know this is the kind of work that you do, that I've done with teams, is where we help them to prepare the business, not just for exit, but to have a really healthy business that's got momentum, that's growing. So I think the first thing is you've got to do the work up front. And then you get to the point of, okay, what are my exit options? Do I go the traditional private equity strategic kind of acquisition option, or do I do something with employees? I'm no expert on those exit options in terms of the financial side and tax implications, but for ESOP, there are some tax benefits. So you might weigh up the sort of tax benefits of going the ESOP route versus a traditional exit. I know that an ESOP comes with sort of governance and regulatory challenges in itself that may, for a lot of owners, be off-putting. And that's why we're seeing this move towards kind of employee ownership trusts, where there's less of an onus in terms of government involvement and governance, and there's more flexibility for the business owner in terms of how they do that. But there's going to be potentially some sacrifice in terms of that exit value. And I think those are all things that you've got to weigh up and consider. But yes, it's not as simple as I'm going to go that route. I think it's about being intentional, knowing which route, what's important to you. So some business owners may put the people, again, in Small Giants, a lot of them would look at the people, look at their legacy, look at the community that they're in, and say, if I sell the business, Paul Spiegelman's a great example of this. Private equity came along, made him a great offer. At the last minute, he kind of pulled the ejection cord and ultimately landed up going a strategic route because the values and the people were more important to him, and the company that they were going to promised to look after those people. That was part of the deal. And Paul ultimately went in to be their chief culture officer. That I think was Cycle. Might have that wrong, but I think it's about being intentional about what you actually want out of this, and it's not always going to be simply down to kind of the financial element. You obviously want to come out in a good position, but yeah.
What else must leaders who aspire to be small giants or believe in this philosophy, what else must they be intentional about, do you think?
That's a really good question. I think overall, people at the core values are so being intentional about how you think about and create your values. A lot of times businesses talk about here's our values and they're stuck up on the wall and that sort of thing. The small giants companies live those values. The decisions are made based on those values. So Tom, Walter, when we sit at Tasty Catering and we go through one of their huddles, they will call out something about their values and they'll call the value out by a number. So number 2 and whatever the value is. Every meeting that they have that's over a certain amount of people or over a certain amount of time, they'll go around the room and each person will call out a value. They're very intentional about how they created those values and how they live those values. So I think we're values-driven leaders in this community, and those values guide all the decisions that we make. And that's something that I think is very difficult for many business owners to get their head around, this idea of almost guiding the business by values rather than simply the harder edge of the business that we talk about in Metronomics, where it's just kind of financial decision making.
So you spoke about values, and we spoke before, or you mentioned finishing big, exiting well. So how do we marry those two things together in the concept of looking after people? You've touched on that, but where do leaders go wrong is the question when we think about finishing big, staying true to the values and retaining the philosophy or the context. Where do you think that leaders can go wrong in that context?
Again, I think it comes back to the people. I mean, there's all the fundamental stuff that you got to work on when you're moving toward a finishing big and doing the work to make sure the business is sellable and that an acquirer views it as something that's attractive. But I think people are a big part of creating that value, and we don't always think about that enough, and we don't consider that enough. So again, going back to Paul Spiegelman and Beryl Health, Paul had this idea of the circle of growth. And first you invest in your people. People, when you invest in the people and make sure they've got the right tools to work with, they're well looked after, they in turn sort of great service to clients. And clients are ultimately going to pay a premium for those services because they want to deal with you, want to deal with your business, they want to deal with those folks. And then that money that comes in is again reinvested in the people. And he talked about this circle of growth, which I think kind of sums it up really well. If you're looking after your people, if you're investing in your people, if they're involved in the decision-making process, if the business is kind of has a clear sense of purpose and has great values, those people are going to make decisions about clients and customers based on values, based on looking after them, giving them the best service they can, making sure that they have a great experience with your business. And that's going to come back in financial rewards, and you can kind of reinvest it. So I think that's one of the best ways of thinking about it.
I was going to ask about Paul Spiegelman's circle of growth. It's funny that you brought that up. So how are you reflecting in your new role leading this community? How are you reflecting on how that applies to the community, the circle of growth, and how you can evolve that over time? I'm guessing that you've kind of contemplated where to, how do we evolve?
Yeah, it starts with my
People.
team, I think. Straight away, we're kind of 5 people, a very small but mighty team we talk about, but it starts right down at the small giants team level. So I have taken over or been able to take over this really great team. And as we grow the community a little bit, which is one of our key objectives, I want to make sure that I'm investing in my team and that they are true representatives of what the small giants ethos is, and making sure that the community members have the best possible experience we can give them. And that ultimately, through the programs we run, the sponsorships we bring in for summits and all that fantastic experience, and we can reinvest that. The community is an L3C, which is essentially purpose over profit business in the US. So we
Like
put
a B
purpose,
Corp.
purpose before. So the LLC version of a B Corp.
Yep.
But for me, Brad, it starts with my team and then
Yep.
kind of spreads out into the community, and every event that we do, everything we do, the way we interact with people, it's really important that it starts with us.
Can you tell me about a moment that you can recollect when, before you were the leader of this community, when you were proud of the community or what resulted from the community?
Yeah. So many of them. Okay. I think the proudest moment for me is when I've taken people to visit small giants companies and they've walked
Yeah.
away and they've just gone, wow. And funny enough, my daughter has got involved lately and she's helping us with our podcast and social media and all those good things. And she's been coming along to community events. She's 24 years old, just finished degree, and it's really fun to work with
Yeah.
your children. So she's come along to some of the events and we kind of finish a visit to Tasty Catering or Ace Metal or Cherry. We were with Cherry's Industrial recently doing customer visits and sort of mini passports. And when she gets into the car with me and we say, okay, let's run through what did we learn? And the things that she comes up with and has learned, and the way she talks about how wonderful those business owners are. So for her to
Yeah.
experience what a business can be like is just phenomenal. I mean, for me, one of my core values is entrepreneurial freedom, but my core purpose is around creating entrepreneurial freedom. But it goes right down to the emerging leadership and the folks who are coming up and the young people who are going into businesses and creating businesses where they feel that sense of mojo that Bo talked about.
Yeah.
When I take somebody else, or I take my daughter into a small giants business and they walk away and they go, wow, that was an experience. I never knew that a business could be like that, where they see their friends or other people going into these more toxic environments. I think that's kind of one of those moments that's just, this is why I do it.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I'm torn about the next question.
Is it going to be a tough one, is it?
No, it's going to be an easy one. That's the thing. And I'm trying to not sound like an old bugger. So
We can't be much different.
Well, to try to not make us both sound like old buggers, how's that? So younger generations, you speak about your daughter, younger generations, it seems from the generational analysis that the experts seem to provide, need a sense of purpose, much greater than previous generations, and readily reject the absence of a sense of purpose. And a transactional job, they will do almost anything to not work at. How do you think that correlates with the purpose-driven philosophy of small giants?
I think it sets those businesses up really well for the next generation coming in.
Yeah.
Many of those small giants businesses have a clear sense of purpose. For younger people coming in, they're conscious of how generations are different. Now,
Yeah.
I know I keep using Tom's business as an example, but we recently visited them.
Yeah. So it's fresh in your mind.
Yeah, it's fresh in my mind. So one of the conversations we had is they have this Tasty Catering University where they take all of their employees, have modules that they can go through and learn. And one of the people on the team is a younger 24-year-old who noticed that the content was probably geared toward a previous generation. And
Yeah.
what she's done has repurposed or redone the content to be more
Relevant?
more bite-sized, like that social media platform, TikTok. So more bite-sized training like
Yeah.
TikTok, which the younger generation finds easier to consume. So I think at least within small giants, is this clear sense of purpose, but there's also the founders, owners, leaders have the ability to dial into the generations, different generations, find the wisdom in those generations, because we carry wisdom across we have wisdom, but each generation has this experience and this wisdom.
Yeah.
They live on these platforms. They know how people kind of consume and learn. So it's that ability to dial into that. And I think it's not just purpose, but also the ability to dial into the different generational kind of stages.
We spoke about this before the podcast. I've got a book coming out in October called Bigger Isn't Better, Better is Better, and it's about building a better business. For you, how would you describe a better business?
Yeah, great question as well. I keep going back to people, but I think we've talked about purpose, we've talked about people. I think that in all the challenges that we're faced at the moment and all the political turmoil and everything that's going on, more than ever, it kind of falls to businesses to make a difference, to make a change.
Yeah.
And I think that a better business is a business that exists for a clear purpose, but also to do good in the world. And I think thinking about what the good is that you're bringing into the world and how you're making the change that you would like to see in the world is a better business. And you're actually going to attract a kind of tribe to that anyway. So you want to attract people who are driven by the purpose of the business or pulled by the purpose of the business, but also who are excited about the change that that business is trying to make in the world. And I had this conversation with Ari from Zingerman's a week or so ago when we visited them, and we were talking about younger people as well. If we really want to make this change, we've got to start with this next generation. So me involving my daughter in the business and letting her see how some of these businesses are run. A lot of the Zingermans are starting a entrepreneurial thing, I think, for young people. So really looking at how businesses are force for good and how we involve younger people earlier on in the sort of entrepreneurial mindset and being a force for good.
Beautiful. Thank you. What is a book that you would recommend for our audience?
Oh, right now, not long ago, I think one of the best books I've read this year has been AI Driven Leader by Jeff Wood. I think just the way he approached using AI and thinking about AI and having AI as a thought partner has been something that I've really, I really embraced and has made a huge difference in my relationship with ChatGPT and all those other great tools that we use. But I think for business owners, that is a brilliant book. So that's kind of the top of my list for this year. Yeah.
Yep. He nailed it. I love it as well. How can people learn more about you, your business, and the Small Giants community?
So I'm on LinkedIn. Happy to connect on LinkedIn, have a conversation there. So that's probably the easiest place to find me. And then Small Giants is just smallgiants.org. And those are probably the two best places to find us. So everything I do now is kind of being rooted through Small Giants, and live on LinkedIn most of the time. So.
Yep, we'll put those in the show notes.
Thanks, Brad.
What haven't we discussed that you wanted to cover off today?
Well, we've had such a great conversation, and I'm excited for your book. And when we started, or before we hit the record button, we were talking about the mindset challenges so many entrepreneurs face and have to go through. And we kind of, I had a moment a couple of years ago with our friend Carl Saunders and some of the folks who spoke at Small Giants, particularly Elizabeth Glassbrenner and Connie Reed, and how the change in sort of mindset is what makes all the difference to all of this stuff. The difference between being a prisoner to the business or just banging your head against a certain number to creating something that is really healthy and that is ultimately something you can sell. I was with a business owner recently and he said to me, Jean, a year ago, I was sitting in this boardroom in tears and 10 million plus in revenue, moving toward 18 million. And he said, I went to a Vistage meeting and I heard about EOS and I implemented it, and it's a year later and it's just been phenomenal. I've got a leadership team in place and all of those good things. It wasn't EOS that made the difference. It was Dave's mindset. And I think this is so critical, regardless of whether we're using Metronomics, EOS, scaling up, GJB, all of these systems. The work that you're doing on the book and talking about mindset, I'm guessing is dealing with some of this, but it's this change in mindset that for business owners, the self-awareness that is so important.
Entrepreneurship doesn't do what it says on the tin. That's the thing. Right? Because it says, you're going to have freedom. You're going to have a better life.
Yeah.
You're going to, you're going to have financial freedom and all of these things, and you'll be healthier. You picture yourself sailing on a boat in the Mediterranean with your partner, and life is beautiful, right? And then you're crying in the boardroom. That's what actually happens to your earlier story. So it doesn't need to be this way. That's the objective, is to say, how do you actually make that deliver what it says on the tin? And it's possible. And how do you need to think? How do you need to reframe and rebuild your life around that?
Yeah, I agree. And I think that is the single biggest challenge. I mean, we talk about leadership being one of the biggest barriers, but it's the business owner. It starts right with the founder, the CEO, the business owner. When that change happens there,
Yeah.
it just kind of unlocks a whole lot of stuff around you. When you stop holding on so tightly to the command and control kind of way, things unlock. And I mean, it was just phenomenal. When I saw Elizabeth banging their head at 3-4 million, all of a sudden she takes over the business, changes the leadership team, and it's up to 20 million. Connie Reed, same thing, banging her head at 3 million, 4 million. She lets off the pseudo armor, 46 million. So if you're driven by that kind of those numbers, that change comes from the mindset. Whether you start using whatever system afterwards, it's the mindset that comes first. So I'm really excited to read your book, because I suspect there's some of that in this book that's coming.
Absolutely. A better business will compound, but it's because you're focusing on the better, not on the bigger.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, John, thank you so much. It's been great to chat with you today. And thank you for sharing your wisdom. I mean, the very purposeful work that you're doing in this community. So thanks for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me, Brad. I really appreciate it. It's been brilliant.
Well, I hope you enjoyed the episode as much as I did. If you'd be kind enough to leave a review for the podcast, that'd be really helpful to other like-minded entrepreneurs, and then we can grow our community. If you want to find out more about our guests, head over to evolutionpartners.com.au/podcast, where you can find show notes and other additional reading. Hope to see you back next week. Until then, keep thriving.